Lean, Scrum, Scrumban, XP Safe, DAD, Less, DSDM, Kaizen, Kanban. Sound familiar? Well, these are just a few of the frameworks out there for delivering agile. But what's best and why? Keep listening to this podcast to understand how you can create agility in your projects and the benefits of a Kanban approach and toolkit. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Aston, founder of The Digital Project Manager. Welcome to the DPM podcast. We're on a mission to help project managers succeed, to help people who manage projects deliver better. We're here to help you take your project game to the next level. Check out thedigitalprojectmanager.com to learn about our training and resources we offer through membership. This podcast is brought to you by Clarizen, the leader in enterprise project and portfolio management software. Visit clarizen.com to learn more. So today I'm joined by Dimitar Karaivanov, and Dimitar is an engineer turned CEO, and he's the co-founder of Kanbanize. He's a lean thinker, he's a Kanban practitioner, and he's got a background in software development and process improvement. He's written a couple of books, Lean Software Development with Kanban, and How Can Portfolio Kanban Benefit Your Business? I think you get the picture. He's passionate about Kanban. So hello, Dimitar. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you and with your audience. So I'm looking forward to this podcast.
Yeah, great to have you. And obviously you're massively passionate about Kanban, and you've built a whole product around Kanbanize. But in your role as the CEO, I'm curious as to what that actually means. What does a typical day look like for you as CEO, as co-founder of Kanbanize?
Yeah, as a CEO of a company, and especially a sort of late startup stage company, you wear a lot of hats. So I typically talk to a lot of customers as I fill in the product management shoes quite often.
Right.
Then I would talk to engineering to just convey the feedback we've gotten from customers. I would engage in enterprise sales. And of course, I will tip into strategy whenever time permits, because it's an important piece of what CEOs do. And by the way, strategy can also be applied with Kanban. So maybe we should find a few minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. But before we dig into that, I'm curious to understand a bit more about your origin story. How did you get into making project management software?
Yeah, that's typically how it happens, out of need. I was the change agent for a big German company. We were transitioning from waterfall processes to agile processes. And we transitioned like 500 people from this old way of doing projects into Scrum. Back then, Scrum was the norm for any new agile implementation. And we trained everybody on Scrum. We had a bunch of agile teams, like 25 or more. But we discovered that while the teams were able to somewhat deliver in a stable manner, it was a mess on the management level where the bigger pieces of work were. And in our case, that were features, epics, things like that. And I figured that we were lacking the tools to manage both the team level and the management/coordination level. And that's how Kanbanize was born, actually, with the goal to scale agile across the organization.
Cool. And so obviously starting a PM tool for the first time and building it, you must have drawn inspiration from other tools that you thought you liked, and also inspiration from tools you knew you didn't like because you thought you needed to build one yourself. Where did that original spark of inspiration come from?
We were using Jira at that company. It's the big 300-pound Godzilla anywhere you go. So it has a bunch of cool stuff in it, but this scaling piece, especially 8 or 9 years ago, was, if not completely missing, then very limited. So while it has a lot of good concepts in it that we derived from, the real inspiration of how we scale Kanban and Agile across the organization actually came more from a physical Kanban board. So what we do with Kanbanize is we try to mimic how you would visualize your work on a physical Kanban board with the great add-on that it's digital and you can connect it with multiple other teams and aggregated data for the management to look and take informed decisions. So it's two tools actually, Jira and physical Kanban boards.
Right. And I'm obviously you make your own project management tool, but I'm interested in finding out what other tools Kanbanize integrates with, or that you also use in parallel with Kanbanize to manage your company, or anything that you found. Actually, any tools that you found that have been working well for you, or that you've just discovered that you think are pretty cool.
Yeah. I would not miss Microsoft Teams because that's, I think, is the fastest growing application in the history of the internet.
Yeah,
it's a killer. We use it at Kanbanize. So I would spend a lot of time on Teams, especially these days when we all work remotely. And then I would spend probably half of my day into a tool that's called Flowy. It's flow-e.com. And surprisingly, It's a tool by our company. It's Kanbanizing your email. So it's a visualization layer on top of your Outlook email that turns your inbox into a Kanban board where you could visualize your emails and maintain conversations in a Kanban-like view. So this is a lifesaver for me. I would literally die without this tool, so I would recommend it. It's free, so everybody can go ahead and try it out.
Oh, I'll check it out. Yeah, my I was just looking now at my currently unread emails 1,189. So if I haven't replied to an email yet, that will go in my to read column.
I know. That's how we came up with Flowy, actually, because it was just too painful to maintain all the streams of information. So I recommend it.
I'll check that out. Cool. So let's talk about Kanbanize. Obviously, you're the CEO of Kanbanize, and this was your brainchild along with the rest of the kind of initial startup team. But we've kind of dipped into the water with what Kanbanize is. So it's a digital Kanban board with some because it's digital, it gives us some improved predictability. It gives us some analytics and data, as well as some rules that we can use. But what would you say? I mean, Kanbanize is obviously great for people who are running projects in a Kanban workflow. But who's your kind of perfect market fit? Who do you find uses your Kanbanize tool?
We are specifically designed for engineering companies, and that might be software engineering, that might be IT/dev operations, and that could be non-IT engineering like manufacturing, construction, things like that. We have a lot of successful customers in the engineering space, but we also get used by marketing teams or operations teams, like in, let's say, banking or insurance. This is also a great fit. It's generally two types of use cases. The project management type of use case is what I just mentioned, engineering. And then the service management is banking and insurance. So those type of customers are the ideal fit. And when we talk about project management, I would love to expand on that. If you want me to, how people do it, what's the specific stuff about Kanbanize and all that.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a real challenge. From my experience, we see that project management people tend to plan projects, tend to estimate projects, and then this plan is somehow converted into tasks or work items. And those work items typically live in some other system. So you have a perfect plan somewhere on a PowerPoint or in Microsoft Project, and then the actual work lives in Jira or somewhere else.
Right.
And then how do you get information about the real status? Well, there's no other way but go ask for status.
Yeah.
And then bug people, how far have we gotten here? What's the percent complete for this task and all that. So we said, all right, we can solve this problem with Kanban, and specifically Kanbanize, by connecting the planning with the execution. So we have a special layer in Kanbanize where you plan the work, a special layer where you execute the work, but those two are connected and they pass feedback from one to the other.
Right.
So when the team starts working on something, the information is automatically propagated to the management layer where the plan is. And for example, if we see that the plan is going to fail, we just notify the project manager and they will automatically know that something's wrong. So instead of waiting 1 week, go ask for status, and then realize, I'm going to be late, then you just get this notification and you can act on it. So it's pretty cool.
You get this notification, your project's going to fail. Pivot quickly. Yeah. Warning, that must be the email that everybody is dreading. Disaster has struck. You are now running behind. Yeah. No, that's cool. So I think obviously the crux of that is that people in the team, and I think this is a challenge with any tool, it's only as good as people kind of update it. And, the challenge that you're solving there is, the project manager has to go around and ask people, okay, so you're on this task. What percentage are you of the way through so that I can update my Gantt chart? And we can work out that way how the project has progressed. But this requires the people involved in the project to update the cards themselves, right, with completion. And guessing time tracking is in there as well. But in my experience of using a tool like Jira, people forget to update cards and update statuses and things like that. So I'm curious how you've kind of built the system to accommodate for, or how you think, or how does it work within Kanbanize to kind of get this real-time view of what people are actually doing and encouraging them to update the status of things.
You're right. That's a problem. And the way you go about solving this problem is actually relying on the Kanban method. The Kanban method is a big body of knowledge, by the way. It's not just a whiteboard on the wall. There's a whole thing called the Kanban maturity model that codifies more than 150 Kanban practices in it. So if anybody is interested, please take a look at the KMM Kanban maturity model so that you see what a mature Kanban implementation actually means. So with that said, there's one thing in the Kanban method that's called feedback loops. And the feedback loops are nothing but regular meetings that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. So one of those meetings is the daily Kanban meeting or the daily stand-up meeting where the team goes in front of the board. So if it's a digital board, you can have a big screen with the board visualized on it. And we go through each of the cards that's currently in progress and we talk about the progress there. So we don't talk about the person and what they did yesterday or today. We talk about the work. What happened with this card? Has it been updated? Does it need to be moved somewhere? Is it on the right position? So we ensure that at least once every day, the cards will be moved to the right position. So that's what I can tell.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it's also interesting that focus on the work rather than the person, because I'm sure people listening have been in stand-ups where, and I see this, actually we use a tool called Stand-Uply, which I think is a really cool integration for Slack. And it asks questions of the team every day. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Have you got any blockers? And it's a great way to have an asynchronous stand-up. So check out Stand-Uply. But one challenge with that is that people will often say, and this happens in real life as well as on Slack, what did you do yesterday? And they'll just talk about a task. What are you doing today? They'll mention the same task. Building widget. What did you do yesterday? Build widget. Any blockers? No. And it's like, okay, well that didn't really help. We haven't really got any more insight on what's going on. So focusing on the work rather than the person just saying their phrase that they say, what are you working on? The widget. I think that's a useful tip. So thanks for that. But in terms of, I mean, you talked about you using Jira, and obviously Jira's bought Trello, which is also a Kanban tool. But I'm curious how you kind of perceive Kanbanize to be different from other tools out there.
Yeah, I will refer that to the KMM again. So the Kanban maturity model talks about 6 levels of maturity, and each level corresponds to different practices. Of course, from the most simple ones to the most complex ones. And tools like Trello, they would be able to take you to maturity level 1 or 2, just because they're lacking the necessary features for a fully capable Kanban implementation. For example, right. Trello is missing completely work in progress limits. I think you can get those with some add-on, but even if you do, it's just a column WIP limit. And with a decent Kanban tool like Kanbanize, you can limit work in progress across multiple columns, across horizontal lanes, across different boards, across people. So it's there's a big emphasis on the Kanban-like features. When we talk about metrics, even in Jira, you wouldn't get out of the box the necessary flow metrics. Like cycle time scatter plot, like Monte Carlo simulations for forecasting that's based on your historical throughput and things like that. You could get those, but it's always through an add-on. It's usually a paid add-on, which adds cost on top of everything. Yeah. And quite frankly, it rarely works well enough when it's just this piece taken from that tool and that piece taken from that tool and stitched together. So I can summarize that Kanbanize is really meant to cover sophisticated Kanban scenarios, especially when we talk about scaling that across the organization and allowing senior management to take informed decisions. Trello is just a team kind of tool. It's great for one team. But if you want to go above that, I don't know if it's even possible. With Jira, it's possible, but it relies on more like on Scrum and not on Kanban as an underlying data collection mechanism. So in Jira, you would forecast based on your historical velocity, which is the cumulative points that you're able to get sprint by sprint. But that's entirely based on the forecasting and the gut feeling of the team, while in Kanban you forecast based on what actually happened, your historical throughput. So it might look like a very tiny difference, but if you try to scale the implementation of 20, 30, 40 teams, then you will quickly realize that one team means, when they say 20 points, they mean something, and the other team means something completely different. And then you have to do some normalization of story points, and it's just a total nightmare that quite frankly doesn't work. So in the Kanban world, we will forecast based on what actually happens, and that's a fundamental difference that is super important in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think just taking a kind of a high-level view of Kanban. So what Dimitar has been talking about is some of these underlying principles of Kanban and how Kanbanize is a great fit for that, because the Kanban system relies on, or really I think my understanding anyway, of the underlying idea is, well, let's try and increase throughput. And we increase throughput by actually minimizing the number of things we're working on at any one time. So when we're talking about limiting work in progress, what we're trying to do is make sure people are a bit more focused, not trying to do 6 different things, but actually completing one thing, getting it out the door before we move, or before we kind of split our focus on working on 3 different things at once. And I'm sure everybody who's ever worked in an agency with multiple clients is very familiar with this scenario where you have multiple clients being worked on at the same time, deadlines that are conflicting with one another. And the idea of Kanban is actually, if we reduce the amount of things we're working on, we can increase the throughput and the efficiency of the way that we work. And we do that by limiting work in progress. And I think that's a really important principle of Kanban. It's let's just be focused on fewer things, and actually we'll get more done
Right.
at the end of it.
Right. You're absolutely right. There's just one caveat to that, and is that if you limit work in progress too much, then you can actually hinder your throughput. So there's a fine balance between being fast enough and having the best possible throughput. That's where every organization has to experiment and find that level of work in progress that's optimal for them and for their context. So what a lot of times people would ask us, well, what's the best work in progress limit? And we'll always say, we don't know because we don't know what your context is. You just have to experiment. You have the data at your fingertips. So you take a look, you inspect every week what the throughput is. Is that satisfactory? And if it is, then you've just found your perfect WIP limit.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I'm curious as to where Kanbanize is heading. So what's on your roadmap? Where do you see Kanbanize being in 5-10 years' time?
Oh, 5-10 years is a very long period in my head. But
okay, 6 weeks.
6 weeks, all right. I can definitely tell you that we are going towards more and more offloading the project manager as what decision has to be taken. So instead of having a person having to calculate stuff and estimate stuff and try to play what-if scenarios, we would like to answer those questions out of the box. So the project manager should be free to focus more on the actual value that's being generated and not so much on are we going to generate this value. So we want to completely take over this monitoring and notification part by introducing specific statistical algorithms. Why not artificial intelligence? I'm very careful throwing the AI word because everybody now speaks AI. The reality is that in what we do, the statistical algorithms like Monte Carlo simulations, for example, provide better accuracy than the AI algorithms that exist. So if somebody is claiming that they forecast a Kanban system based on AI, they are probably not doing pure AI machine learning stuff. But I think the industry is going that way for sure. So we should find algorithms that will provide better accuracy than the statistical algorithms. So this is the direction, offloading the PMs to do other important work and not just monitoring and then writing status reports.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about that. So obviously, most of our listeners are people managing projects or project managers, maybe product managers as well. But how do you see with the kind of evolution of tools like Kanbanize to take on much more of that forecasting, kind of planning component of the work? Well, I guess the administration side of it, finding out what's going on in a project and reporting it, which is quite kind of boring work. And instead, you talked about being more focused on value generation. So how do you see the role of the project manager changing and evolving? And when you're talking about value generation, that kind of, to me, sounds like more product management and product ownership as we're thinking about, delivering incremental value. So I'm curious as to how you see that role evolving and changing.
Yeah, I think the project manager should more and more be the interface that not only flows the data through, meaning communication, requirements, deadlines, things like that, but also enriches this data. It puts the data to doubt and questions, is it the right thing we're building, or is it the right service we are producing? So to me, the project manager should be the person that is pushing the system into further evolution. That these are people that ask the right questions and the tough questions. A lot of project managers nowadays would only talk to the customer, get the requirements, put them in the requirements tool, and pass that to development. And when the development is done, they would go back to the customer and they will say, hey, this is done. Let's see how we deliver that. I think that's valuable, but just partially valuable. I think those guys should be the ones to enrich this data channel by getting the needs of the customer, not just writing up a requirement. And when they have enough time to do that, when they don't have to produce the reports and do the timesheets and do the budgeting stuff, when that is offloaded to the software they're working with, then I think they can focus much more on what is actually being produced and is it the best solution for the problem that's underlying this feature request or something.
Yeah, that's. I think that sounds like a good plan. And I want to ask you, in terms of, I mean, we've talked about the future of project management and how our role changes as we get better data and we can focus on understanding the needs of users and customers and translating that more accurately into the requirements and making sure we're delivering value. But I mean, we've talked about AI and the importance of AI, or accuracy, I guess, within tools. But how do you see overall the PM tool landscape changing? And I'm curious how you're adjusting to that. Obviously, we have players like Jira who bought out Trello, some consolidation happening there. And then we have, I guess, more startup-y tools like ClickUp who come in and try and create a system to manage everything, kind of an all-in-one solution to everyone, but with, a defined workflow. So I'm curious how you see your competitive landscape changing and how you're adjusting to that.
Yeah, you're right. There are a plethora of tools out there, especially when we talk about managing smaller teams' work. I think there are thousands of those. And if anybody's trying to penetrate that market, they must be optimists, because it's a real challenge out there. So what we do with Kanbanize is that we turn our product not just into a team management solution, but we are heading into actually an agile portfolio management solution. And the functionality is partially there. It's obviously a big task. So it takes 10 years to build that, but we're 80% through. So just 20% left to really close the gap there. And in that area, the agile portfolio management landscape, you basically get a bunch of Godzillas that rely on Scrum and story points, which I think is okay, but it's not going to be the future. The future is well, that might be biased, but I think the future is what we'll build. That's not based on what people think is going to happen, but based on what actually happens, and building those informational highways from the teams to the senior management and back. So to cut a long story short, I think the tooling is consolidating around the concepts of scaling stuff across the organization. Those team level tools, they will always going to exist, and there will be the new one with the magnificent user experience that solves the problem for 3 people but fails to solve the problem on a larger scale. So those are going to come in and come out all the time. That's a given. But the ones that are going to win big time are the ones that will solve this huge problem of how do we get agility on a company scale.
Yeah. Cool. Well, and let's talk about, I mean, you've written an article, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, Dimitar's written a great article, and it's called Kanban-Powered Business Agility. You can check that out on the digitalprojectmanager.com. And he offers a whole bunch of tips for implementing a Kanban approach. But first, I just want to touch on business agility, because I think this is kind of what you're touching on just a second ago, what does that really mean to you? What is business agility?
To me, business agility means our ability to satisfy our markets through rapid learning cycles, through experimentation and adaptation. So to me, business agility is not a framework that you implement or some abbreviation that you claim you're doing. It's nothing but the ability to experiment quickly, learn as an organization, and then use this knowledge to produce more value for your customers. So that's, to me, business agility.
And obviously, you're a massive proponent of Kanban. And I mean, you called Kanbanize after Kanban. Everything is Kanban orientated. So obviously, I mean, a second ago you were comparing, I guess, Kanban to Scrum. And I'm curious why you kind of pinned your colors on the Kanban mast and why you think it's best suited for business agility. What do you think it's good for, but then what do you also recognize it's bad for?
That's a great question. And the answer is related to one of the principles of Kanban, which says start where you are and then evolve experimentally. What I just said a minute ago. There's no alternative that I'm aware of that tells you if you want to be agile or if you want to improve your business agility, start with what you do now and then improve it. Yeah. It's always a big jump that you have to do in order to get better. It's always restructure your teams, or it's always get that certification and then let's build an agile train and whatnot. And Kanban just says, all right, start where you are, visualize what's currently happening on a board, and then ask the questions, how can we do this better? So I think this is a humane approach to agility because it doesn't cause too much stress for the organization, at least initially. It can cause a lot of stress if you do Kanban right. And it will cause a lot of stress if you do Kanban right, but it's an evolutionary process, and then people are prepared for it, and they embrace it. That's my experience, at least. So I think that's why Kanban is so much better than anything else that we know today. It's because it's a humane approach. And when you do it right, it will reduce stress, it will reduce overburdening of the people working in the organization. And this is also another factor why Kanban is a humane approach. It's because it helps people enjoy the work they're doing. It helps them focus on a few things at a time, do it better, and not constantly try to put out fires and then switch from one thing to the other. That's what I believe Kanban is great for. And the bad parts of Kanban, and I'm not sure if it's Kanban's fault, to be honest. I think the biggest problem with Kanban is that people think it's just a visual board on the wall. And as I said multiple times already, Kanban is a huge body of knowledge. There's at least a dozen books written about Kanban. So I encourage the listeners to research about it. There's much more to it than a whiteboard.
Yeah, and but in some ways though, the upside of that is that lots of people do know what Kanban is, which in terms of the process. And I think if you ask someone to explain Scrum or you ask them to explain Kanban, you could explain Kanban in its simplest form much more quickly and easily than you could. Sorry, I don't know what I just said, but you can explain Kanban much more simply and easily than you could Scrum, where you have to explain, well, okay, we've got this backlog and then you've got this sprint, and you need to pull these items in, and then this happens, and then there's this ceremony, and then there's this happens, then this happens. And then it's a framework that, like you say, and I liked the way that you kind of framed Kanban as a more human or a lighter entry point into the world of Agile, where actually you don't have to completely change the way that your delivery framework. You don't have to run in sprints. You don't have to do the different ceremonies. Like there's Scrum dictates a lot of things, which can be helpful things, but it can be a lot to take on all in one big bite. And you have to do a lot of reshaping the process, whereas Kanban can be a bit more of a softer entry point into running things more efficiently.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a more reasonable thing to do, because if we go somewhere and without dipping into the context, we say, hey, you should do this and you're going to be better. I think it might be a little bit arrogant of us to do that.
Yeah.
Because if a company has a successful business, and if they have managed to deliver a product, a service that's appreciated by the customer, then they must know something, right? They must know how they build stuff, how they deliver stuff. So they know something.
Mm.
And if we go ahead and we eliminate that something because we believe our framework is the best thing on the planet, then I think it's arrogant. It's much better to go there and say, hey, okay, let's see what exactly we're doing here, and then improve from there. I think that's, in any case, anywhere, in life, in business, in school, I think that's the better approach.
And in your post, you talk about refining your workflow, which is kind of what you're talking about here. You know, we find an easy access point, we get in, and then we start refining things. We want to reduce waste. We want to be lean. We want to potentially reduce the work in progress so it can be a bit more focused and deliver more quickly, value more efficiently. But how does that workflow refinement actually happen? I mean, it's an easy word to say, but how do you refine your workflow?
We typically do this through what we call queues and work in progress limits. So when you start working on a visual board, if you are diligent and if you're not really mature into the Kanban and lean subjects, then I bet over time you would see a bunch of cards piling up on the board somewhere. And then that column is likely a problematic spot on the workflow.
Right.
It's either too slow, or the stage before it is too fast. So it's flooding the downstream with too much work that the downstream cannot actually catch up with. So when you have a situation like this, you should pause and reflect on the situation. Ask yourself, hey, why are we seeing this work pile up here? And then what would typically happen is we would either introduce new columns, the so-called ready columns. So if you have a process that's working on and then review and then done, we would introduce a column between working on and review that's called ready for review.
Right.
And then we will see whether the cards under ready for review are piling up or not. And if they are, it means that our review phase is a bottleneck. It cannot catch up with the amount of work that the working on is producing. So we can limit the work in progress under the ready for review column. And then when we fill it up, then the previous column should stop producing any more work and go help the reviewers. So that's the typical thinking process. You see work piling up somewhere.
Yeah.
You go inspect. You refine the workflow if needed. You apply WIP limits if needed. Then you run again. You see what happens, and you do this all the time.
And with the goal of trying to reduce those bottlenecks. So what we don't want is cards piling up and work not being completed, which ultimately is where we see the value being created, is when things are actually finished, not just moved along necessarily. Right.
We should do this constantly by while observing cycle time. The cycle time is the time that the cards spends on the board before being completed, actually. So the shorter the cycle time, the better, of course. So while we monitor the metrics and we see the cycle time growing, It most likely means we have work piling up on the board, which we should inspect, refine the workflow, limit some cells or some queues to make sure we don't overload the bottleneck, and do this all the time.
Cool. And I just want to touch on another one of your tips, which was converting hippos to hippos. Now, you have to read the post to understand this, but it's basically about the highest paid person's opinion, changing their opinion mattering to the highest probability option, so that you're using real data to drive decision making. And now I'm curious as to how this plays into your team and your role. Probably as the CEO, I'd hope you're one of the highest paid people in the company. But what would your advice be to your own team being told to back down on on something? How would you? Because I think it's really difficult when you're actually in the team and you're saying, well, it's not about the highest paid person's opinion. Let's look at what the data says. How would you, as a CEO, how would you tell your team to present that to you?
That's tough, to be honest. I made so many mistakes in our company to get to this enlightenment. That it's really a lot of money being thrown on the garbage. So what I try to do with our teams, whenever I hear somebody taking a decision out of their guts without any data being presented, without any data being observed, I would immediately start questioning and challenging them to the point where they ask themselves, okay, how did I arrive at this conclusion in the first place? Can I take a more informed decision? And it's quite natural for people to want to be right. Everybody wants to be right. Yeah. So we come up with a proposal, and we immediately believe that it's the best proposal on the planet. And I'm particularly opinionated person. I think most CEOs are. So if I argue with somebody from my team, well, guess what? I always win unless there's data. And when there's data, and when the data is sticked in my face, then if you are a little bit reasonable, at least, then the argument changes. So I've kept repeating hundreds of times to my teams, hey guys, let's not take decisions out of our guts. And these are just opinions. We all have opinions. And if you want to compare your opinion with my opinion, you always lose. So you better have data. And it's kind of working. It's a transition period. It's taken us a lot of time. I think it's our second or third year trying to completely engrave this into our DNA as a company. It's real tough thing to do, but we believe in it, and it's just practice that needs to happen 10,000 times, and we'll then get it. So the short answer is that you have to be super persistent with that.
Yeah.
You must require data, and if you slip, then it will be painful. We've done this many times.
Yeah. So just to finish, if obviously your post is all about business agility and how Kanban can be great at powering that business agility. So for someone who's maybe wanting to dip their toe in the water with Kanban, what do you think is a good starting point? I mean, you talked earlier about, Kanban accepts, the place where you start becoming more agile is where you're at, and it doesn't need to necessarily mean you need to introduce these wholesale changes to your process immediately. But what are the first steps to becoming more agile through a Kanban approach?
I would say there are 2 or 3 very important things. One of the very important things is to visualize your work. This is something that we all can do. We don't have to be Kanban experts to visualize our work. You just find a way to do it. The physical board is the obvious first choice. You just have a sticky notes. You have the sticky notes, you have the board, you have some magnets, you draw a few columns with a marker, you have it in 2 minutes. So there's really no excuse not to visualize your work. And that's, of course, if there's any source of dissatisfaction. If there's no source of dissatisfaction, if everything is perfect, then why bother? But if there's any problem that you want to solve, then step number 1, visualize your work. Step number 2, limit work in progress somehow. At least start where you are. If you visualize everything and you have 100 projects in progress, put a WIP limit of 100. It's ridiculously high, but at least it acknowledges that's what's truly happening. And then start trying to decrease that number of projects in progress until things get better. And step number 3, if not step number 1 even, I would advise people to get some high-quality Kanban training. We are partners of Kanban University. That's the certification authority behind Kanban. It's a worldwide organization with hundreds of trainers. I would highly recommend getting such training. It might be a little bit expensive if you train your entire company, but at least the key people, I would say, should have this formal training.
Nice. And I think what's really valuable there, what you're talking about, is that first step of visualizing the current workflow and identifying the pain points. Mm-hmm. It can sound like, well, this is really, really tough. But actually, once you get into it, it can be, it's definitely rewarding, at least for you to map out with your team. And what you might find is that different people think that the current process is actually different things in terms of the way that work moves through the organization. Maybe it's moving from strategy through UX design, build, QA, release. What you'll probably find is that different people think different things happen in terms of the approval process or review cycles. So it's really useful thing to do is, firstly, just visualizing your process, I think is a really good tip. And there you can more easily identify those pain points. Where are things going wrong? Where are things getting bottlenecked? And that can then help you think about, okay, well, how do we limit the work in progress so we can increase the throughput? So thank you, Dimitar. That's super helpful. And if you want to check out Kanbanize, go to kanbanize.com. We'll stick it in the show notes. But Dimitar, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you with us.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the offer. It was really fun talking to you. I enjoyed the conversation. Let's keep it up.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more and get ahead in your work, come and join our tribe with DPM membership. Head to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership to get access to our team, templates, workshops, AMA sessions, office hours, ebooks, and more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. But until next time, thanks so much for listening.